I'm sure, like me, right before you sleep, you are crowded with thoughts of the past or think about things that are just too interesting to fall asleep on. Sometimes it's taboo to think about it or it's just too plain embarrassing to recall. There are even whole meme formats about this, so I doubt it's exclusive just to myself. Anyway, a few days ago, I closed my eyes and all I saw was this face. And it inspired me to make a video for my friends, family, or whoever just wants to watch it. I made this video just to get my thoughts fleshed out and to hopefully hear some thoughts from you as well. The picture you see here is Adolf Eichmann. He was one of the main drivers of the Nazi Holocaust and was simply known as the final solution of the Jewish question. Now, the Jewish question for Nazi Germany was simply, what do we do with all the Jewish people that we want to get rid of? The final answer was one of the most brutal and evil events in history that humanity has ever seen. I'm sure that I do not need to elaborate any further, but what they did was basically to kill the Jews on an industrial scale, from capturing to transportation to execution to disposal, all overseen by this man, Adolf Eichmann. After the war, Eichmann was caught in Argentina and put on trial in the early 1960s in Jerusalem. I'm sure that when you think of Nazi Germany, we all think about evil, strict, crazy dictators that care only for world domination. We think of the Nazis as being brainwashed to hate Jews and are set on propagating what they thought was the perfect Aryan race. All throughout our lives, we think of acts of pure evil as something far beyond us, and that only the most evil beings are capable of the most evil deeds. So imagine what the jury felt like when Eichmann appeared to the trial as a scrawny old man who looked like he didn't really know why he was here in the first place. The man himself spoke in a very gentle manner and had a very kind demeanor to him. Throughout the trial, he talked about how he himself had Jewish family members and never really fell for any Nazi propaganda. In fact, the first thing he did was to help his family members to escape. In his own words, he said, "With the killing of Jews, I had nothing to do. I never killed a Jew, or a non-Jew for that matter. I never killed a human being. I never gave an order to kill a Jew or a non-Jew. I just did not do it." Eichmann was simply in charge of the logistics of the final solution, such as things like procuring the trains for transportation and even making sure there was enough food in the concentration camps. Distribution of food was not up to him, but he did make sure that food was available when it was needed by the Nazi army. Eichmann was basically the man in the office following orders from above, while the war was happening outside. In her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, Hannah Arendt, a German political philosopher, documented the trial and showed the world how human Eichmann behaved. He never had any malicious or sinister thoughts of actions throughout the trial, and he had a thought process very similar to you and me. She called this situation an example of the banality of evil. A quick Google search will tell you that banality means unoriginal or commonplace, and what Arendt is trying to say here is that our society is structured such that acts of evil become so detached from its execution that everyone becomes capable of doing it. To Eichmann, all he had to do was to prepare trains and food at designated locations at designated times. Nothing that screams evil so far, right? You may argue that the fact that he knew it was meant for acts of evil makes his acts inherently evil in themselves. But for Eichmann, it was simply a means to escape. As was stated in the court proceedings, almost every soldier in Eichmann's leadership circle was involved in some form of corruption to gain favors from the rich in society. Some of them were even rich Jews that have bribes paid out for their papers to be changed to show that they were not even Jewish or just half Jew. This was in preparation for the collapse of the war. These soldiers amassed funds and contacts in preparation for the collapse of the war and to find a means of escape. Alternatively, if the German won, these generals would have stood at the upper echelons of society right alongside Hitler. Either way, having rich and powerful friends in crazy Nazi Germany had to count for something, right? Eichmann knew that he was in a fragile situation and that he had to do the same as what the other generals were doing for him and his family. And pushing a few papers around wasn't really a bad way to do it. The consequences would bring him to the Führer himself, poverty or prosecution for his war crimes should Nazi Germany fall, both of which would have gone bad for him and his family. Eichmann was caught between a rock and a hard place. His lawyer, Robert Servatius, reiterated that Eichmann had not broken any law by the Nazi state and that he committed acts, quote unquote, for which you are decorated if you win and to the gallows if you lose. Eichmann's defense during the court proceedings was that his presence of the trial was simply an act of circumstance. To put this into perspective, imagine getting paid handsomely for contracting a company to cut down a rainforest, knowing that you'll be killing all the plants and animal species that live there, not to mention the carbon emissions and so on. You won't have to deal with any of the hard work yourself, but only with the supply of the equipment and to fulfill your end of the contract. Also, think about this knowing that there's a huge recession on the way and that you need to protect your family. What would you do? Many of us would rather be paid handsomely and to weather through the recession that was to come. This was exactly the situation that Eichmann was in. It was unfortunate that Eichmann was not smart enough to avoid the authorities, although he did manage to outrun them for 15 years. But imagine the generals that managed to get away and live the remainder of their lives without retribution from their sins. There was no doubt that Eichmann was guilty. But was he guilty because of his intentions or because of his circumstance? Was he evil or was he, well, human? That is the question that I pose to you today. To end off my video, I would like to read you the final statements said to Eichmann before the death penalty was passed. You told your story in terms of a hard luck story, and knowing the circumstances, we are, up to a point, willing to grant that under more favorable circumstances, it is highly unlikely that you would ever have come before us or before any other criminal court. Let us assume, for the sake of argument, that it was nothing more than misfortune that made you a willing instrument in the organization of mass murder. That still remains the fact that you have carried out, and therefore actively supported, a policy of mass murder. For politics is not like a nursery. In politics, obedience and support are the same. And just as you have supported and carried on a policy of not wanting to share the earth with the Jewish people and the people of a number of other nations, as though you are the superiors that had any right to determine who and who should not inhabit the world, we find that no one, that is, no member of the human race, can be expected to share the earth with you. This is the reason and the only reason you must hang. Adolf Eichmann died by hanging on 1st June 1962, with his last words being, "I die believing in God."